Hey guys, hope you're all well. On this video, I will be talking about my New York year, or I guess if you're in America, it's called my Salinger year, different title in the UK and probably Europe. And it's based on the book by Joanna Rakoff, and so it's kind of like based on her true life experiences of moving to New York as a young person in her early 20s, and of her experiences of working as an intern at this publishing house, a big publishing house, where she ultimately has the ambition of becoming a writer herself, but this is kind of her idea of getting a foot in the door. And it's like the day-to-day experience is almost her doing like the dog's body, most basic sort of work. I mean, at one point she sort of jokes how she feels like she's a secretary, and she is a very, very icy, hard working boss played by Sigourney Weaver, who's a real sort of drill sergeant, very sort of traditional and has her ways, very like steadfast, quite a oddball sort of character in herself. But one of the big crux of the films is that the Joanna character, the firm that she's an intern at, one of their clients is J.G. Salinger, and Salinger famously is very reclusive. So one of the things she's asked to do while she's there, which takes up, a big amount of the film, is that she's told to read through his letters, or his fan letters, basically, that they received, and all the sort of fans and their obsessions and every little thing. But she's told to read them, but then to shred them all, essentially. And it's about how she becomes emotionally invested in them and gets caught up in them, and actually, against the advice of her employees, her bosses, she actually responds to the fans' letters, and that's kind of spiral. So it kind of gets into like obsessive fan behavior, but also kind of stardom and that kind of thing, and plays with those sorts of ideas. But it's also at its core like a coming of age type tale. So it's about her experiences, her kind of experience in New York life at a young age, and her ambitions to be a writer, and how she tries to balance it out. And I think that it captures that sense of like being lost in a big city for the first time, coming from a bit more kind of modest sort of means, and also being excited, but also being quite lost and scared. The way things go. I mean, at one point she's living with this guy played by Douglas Booth, this sort of bohemian like style boyfriend, and there's almost this joke between them where he sort of keeps teasing her a little bit because she's never actually read J.G. Salinger, even though she's like an aspiring writer, and has read, most other big writers. But in any case, their relationship sort of takes off, and she's sort of kind of in the middle of she sort of left her like college boyfriend behind, and hasn't broken up with him, but they sort of do move in together, her and the Douglas Booth character, and over time there's a tension there, and there's a tension of where her life's going, and the fact that he's actually writing a novel while she's there, so she kind of feels that her ambitions of being a writer is sort of sidetracked, and the contrast with her friend. So there's kind of general about the experiences. It's based on the book, as I said, and Joanna in the film is played by Margaret Qualley, who I didn't think I'd seen her in anything, but when I went back and researched, I thought I've actually seen her in a few things, without knowing. She was in The Nice Guys, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Apparently, she was in Leftovers on TV, so a bunch of stuff, and she's really good. But the other thing I found out is that she's actually Andy McDowell's daughter, so that's pretty cool, which you can kind of see if you look. But she's great. She's very, very natural, and she sort of makes you believe in the character. She's very, just has that sort of naivety, but also kind of youthful sort of energy about her. Just, it's all in the eyes in a way, but she's very, very sort of captivating and sympathetic and sort of quite quirky and likable. So really good casting, and she's obviously, it's her experiences, so if her performance didn't work, really the film wouldn't work. But she's really good, very natural, that's definitely the word. And I think there's certain things about the film which at times are a bit kind of challenging, and so I think a lot of credit goes to her performance and how good she is, and how likable the character is. I mean, I guess it's based on her book and stuff, so they're not going to make her unlikable. But I did think she was quite well written, and it sort of felt like an authentic portrayal of New York life, especially as a young person trying to find your way and the ambitions. And I think there's a couple of things that sometimes these sorts of films can kind of trip up on. First of all, because you do actually have like references to, I mean, a lot of like famous writers, but obviously J.G. Salinger, and the fact that he's a client. So, you know, you get sort of a few scenes where he's actually talking to Joanna over the phone, and it's like a voice on the other end of the phone. And it just becomes this elephant in the room, because it's like, well, he's a real life person, so how are they gonna like treat it? How much of him are you gonna see? And I think just because you're watching like a fictional account of this like life story, or this sort of part of her life, and then you introduce, you know, like obviously a real life, it can be a bit distracting, and it maybe was a bit distracting at times, but obviously overall it's from her perspective. And yeah, they don't make him like a big character in the film outside of how people are reacting and talking about him and some of his habits and stuff. So it's not a massive deal. And there are actually some funny sort of like jokes about, you know, writers and things like him. There's a nice sort of joke about like the writer Rachel Cusk at one point when they're in the restaurant, and Joanna is kind of like talking about her novel, and this woman sort of says, well, no, actually I think it's about this, basically. And yeah, Joanna sort of comes back, and then one of them says, Joanna, meet Rachel Cuss. So that was a good moment. I enjoyed that. So that's one of the dangers. I think the other danger is that because you're dealing with quite a snooty sort of world, and sort of quite, you know, quite often there's this image of like these pompous sort of like New York, you know, arty types. And it's definitely depicting that sort of world. So I think sometimes in movies like this, I can find the characters a bit too annoying and hard to take, but actually they get around that because there is a lightness of touch, I think, in the direction, and they also make it quite witty and quite funny, quite satirical at times. Maybe it could have been a bit more of a satire. I think that's a complaint I sort of have, but they could have went a bit further. But I think once you get into the film and you just see it as like a coming of age type tale, and a bit more of a quirky sort of, you know, exploration of this sort of thing, and because it's a character thing where it's all from her point of view, then I think that kind of excuses it a little bit. And I just enjoyed it as that, but maybe it could have been a bit more satirical. there's a couple of things it's sort of prodding at. There's, I think it is looking at fame and, fandom and unpacking that. And there are a couple of darker sort of moments where, from some of the fans' point of view, it's sort of getting into like themes of race and stuff and kind of working class and the war, and it does prod at sort of darker things, and there's a couple of bits where it works pretty well and sort of makes you think, but on the whole it sort of shies away from that, a little bit, and it's not really what the film is going for. Sort of could be a film which is maybe a little too quirky, but one or two scenes are like that. But overall, I think they get the right balance, and I was, once I got into it, I was actually really charmed and taken with the film and the character, and I enjoyed the characters in general and the New York setting and the interactions. You got a good supporting cast. I mean, obviously Sigourney Weaver, who plays her boss, is always reliably good, and it's a great bit of casting, making her this sort of icy, sort of steadfast, tough talking sort of boss who just has this presence a lot of times just through like smoking a cigar and not really saying much, just having this icy stare. She's so sort of entertaining and believable as well. I think you believe that this sort of character would be running like a publishing house, and there's something about her old-fashioned sort of way, like how she insists on Joanna using a typewriter and is very anti like computers. I think stuff like that you can imagine even today. I can't remember exactly when this is said, but even today, you kind of imagine that there's people with that mindset. So I did sort of like the whole atmosphere and Joanna coming in and just having to adjust to like the sort of oddball sort of ways and almost like a world of its own. But as I said, the film does have a lightness of touch to it. It is. There are like a few scenes where it actually is very cinematic, and there's a really sort of beautiful scene actually with her and like her. Well, I guess her ex-boyfriend, as it is, Carl, the one who she left behind, and really nice scene with that. Really nice use of music, and also just think, speaking of people in her life, there's I like the friendship with her and her sort of, well, her best friend really, who also lives in New York, who at the start of the film Joanna is staying with, and that was really good because it turns out like her best friend is just this really down to earth sort of person who isn't snobby, and unlike a lot of people, she just knows what she wants from life. Unlike Joanna, she's not really driven to be artistic or to write a book, and it was almost like a small phase where at one point she mentions it, but no, she just has a steady job and she's happy to settle down with her husband and like have kids, and that sort of becomes a crossroad in their friendship at one point where Joanna is, I don't know, in that headspace where she's a bit surprised and almost a bit kind of snobby without like realizing it, and I think that's very relatable. But I actually do like the best friend. I like how honest she is and how down to earth she is, and actually how she looks out for Joanna and gives her good advice, is honest but supportive as well, because actually there's a scene where she brings her like a letter from Carl and highlights that and the situation, and because he invites her to like his sort of concert. So there's this sort of thing where she's pushing her in that direction and kind of like yeah, go and see him because you've got to deal with this sort of thing. And it's just really honest, and I do like their friendship. She's a really good sort of best friend, and ultimately it's sort of like a life lesson in a way. The way, maybe at one stage Joanna's going down one path and sort of neglecting her best friend, and maybe looking down on her a little bit, but then ultimately she learns, hey, this is a good person who's always been in my life and will always be there for me. So that's pretty cool. So that's a nice thing, and yeah, enjoyable film overall. It maybe took a bit of getting into, but I liked it a lot. I enjoyed it a fair bit, and a good character, good lead performance. So I'm gonna give it 7 out of 10. Um, yeah, good stuff. I'd recommend checking it out. And I know it's my New York year of film. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. Share me out on social media, all the rest of it. But I'll be back soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.